Hi, and welcome to my recap of patch 12.3 in the 4 major regions. I do this for every patch. If you missed my video yesterday, I did 12.2. I'm doing 12.2 and 12.3 in back-to-back days because the LPL and LCK didn't wait, but just the way it turned out, the LPL did not play 12.3 at all. That's why there's not many stats here, because I only do the stats if there's more than 10 games, because I feel like 6 games isn't enough to say, how that matchup, really actually play out in pro play more often than not. It's just 6 matchups. So I didn't do that. I didn't do it on 12.2. I didn't do it on 12.1. There are some matchups that occurred more than 10 times, which I will, have further breakdowns of throughout this video. But as far as top lane goes, there was nothing that happened 10 times. If you look at the 12.2 video, if you watched it, a lot of Gwen. Everything was about Gwen. Well, Gwen is still a popular champion, as you see here with Jace and Gwen and Graves and Gwen. But Graves and Jace were really popular. Graves was really popular. Tryndamere also very popular. Tryndamere was being banned a lot. That's why it only appears once. Gwen was also banned a lot too, and if it wasn't banned, it was picked, sometimes put in the jungle. And a lot of people had different counters to it, whether they wanted to get Finesse and have Camille or Fiora against it, or they want to go with Gnar, or they want to go with, Jace or Graves. So that was kind of the top meta. It was more of a ranged meta between Jace and Graves, and then we have Tryndamere, which can just kill anybody it wants because it's a Tryndamere. And Gwen, Gwen is still a popular champion, and in 12.4, it still continues to be popular. And I imagine 12.4 will have more information to go off of when we form a meta and how to look back at the patch. But looking back at 12.3, this is where Tryndamere began to become a bigger part of the meta in top lane. And Graves and Jace were just like picked against each other as a handshake matchup. So on to the jungle. Okay, now with the jungle, there was one common matchup we saw a lot, which was Xin Zhao versus Lee Sin. Clearly the first two most popular champions on this patch, similar to 12.1 and 12.2. Xin Zhao on the first two, Lee Sin is listed on 3 of these. We saw some Hecarim. Obviously, if this patch was played in the LPL, I imagine that this would also be a very popular matchup, which would have all this, but it only had 9, not 10. And that's without one region playing. So that's why I'm, inferring that it would have been 10 times. Because Xin Zhao struggled so much, if you recall in the patch 12.2 video, if you watched it, Xin Zhao had a losing win rate against Lee Sin and Jarvan on the patch. So when push comes to shove, people weren't really picking Xin Zhao that much. And if they did, Lee Sin was picked against it. Hecarim was picked against it. And that's why Lee Sin continues to have a strong win rate against Xin Zhao in pro play. In solo queue, I will say that obviously Xin Zhao has a better win rate because Lee Sin is a technical champion. It's harder to play Lee Sin than Xin Zhao. So if you're in solo queue playing Lee Sin, their kicks aren't as good and things of that nature, which allows for Xin Zhao to have a stronger win rate. But clearly, Lee Sin, a very popular champion on this patch, played in multiple different matchups. It was kind of like, what do you want to play against the Lee Sin? And depending who piloted it, some Lee Sins are definitely better than others, and you didn't want to give it up. And you could just see some teams were giving up Lee Sin to the wrong teams, and they were getting hot on patch 12.3 because of it. The mid part is not going to be very long. Not a lot of common matchups, but let's get into it. So, like I said, mid is not all that plentiful. I only have LeBlanc versus Ryze here because it's the only matchup they happen 5 times. I could be wrong. You could look back at it yourself. There was a lot of 4s. We saw Corki matchups. We saw Victor matchups. Ahri, Vex, Orianna, Syndra, and many different people playing different things into the Ryze and into the LeBlanc. But nothing that was a common trend. Ryze was being banned a lot, and when it was being picked, and people had different picks against it, trying to match the Realm War. Maybe you go Twisted Fate, maybe you go Galio. When you have LeBlanc picked, well, some people said, well, we're going to go Ahri into it, we're going to go Vex into it, we're going to go Lissandra into it, because Lissandra is a common champion against LeBlanc that works really well. So, in all, the mid meta was just a chaotic mess. LeBlanc versus Ryze was the most common matchup, only happening 5 times as listed. Rise is still probably one of the strongest mid laners, though. The tank Rise build is still very popular. We'll see if 12.4 has more information here, which I imagine it will. But right now, as far as 12.3 was concerned, the mid lane was a chaotic mess of just anyone picking whatever they wanted into whatever. So that's that. Now on to bot lane. Alright, so bot lane, we had some common threads here. Aphelios versus Jinx, once again, by far and away the most common matchup across all 5 roles. Last patch in 12.2, it happened 80 times. In this one, it happened 38 times without even the LPL playing. Clearly, Jinx is the common thread here. If Jinx was open, it was first picked, having strong win rates against everything. And the most common matchup against it was Aphelios. And if Aphelios was not the pick, it was Jhin. And if it wasn't Jhin, it was Caitlyn, and it still struggled. If the Jinx was banned and Aphelios was picked, most common people went with Jhin. However, we saw some Sennas. We saw Tristana versus Zeri. Zeri was nerfed for 12.3, so it was not picked as much, and it was still banned too. So like it just, I think people were going away from it. Everyone was just content with handshaking Aphelios versus Jinx. However, Jinx was the winner in more often than not, 56%, 64%. Clearly strong win rates. Same as 12.2, so continue to keep going on. Same thing with solo queue. So the meta pretty much is Jinx, Jinx, and Jinx. And then if you want to handshake Aphelios, good luck. More often than not, you're going to lose. And if you pick Jhin, even more often than not, you're going to lose. So you have to get real creative against a Jinx or ban it. As you know, if you're not going to get it, you have to ban it. Otherwise, more often than not, you're going to lose. So that is with the bot lane. Support will be more like mid and top. Well, more like top than mid. Mid, I mean, obviously, there's only one listed, but there won't be as much information. But let's see what the support meta was for 12.3. So lastly, we have support here. We have the four most common matchups. Obviously, you see a common trend here. Leona. Thresh continued to be first pick or ban in terms of being paired with an Aphelios or a Jinx. We had it matched with Leona, Nautilus 5 times. I know it's not listed here. Rakan, things like that. Obviously, a lot of people, if Thresh was banned, they pick Leona first. And then, Nautilus would be picked against it. Tahm Kench was common. Rakan was common. Karma was common because we saw some Ezreals, we saw some Caitlyn's, and that brought in the Karma to be against Jinx Leona or Aphelios Leona. But clearly a Leona-centered patch when it came to, what we're going to pick. Are we just going to settle with Leona? That's what they did. Similar to people settling with things like in top lane, like Graves and Jace. This is more similar to the top lane meta in that, like, people just settled with the pick and said, okay, well, we're just going to handshake this, play whatever you normally play against it, and it's the same every game, pretty much. And that's, what happened in the support role. Because, so much, it's all decided, really. The pizzazz is decided in support in bot lane. Because bot lane really was Aphelios Jinx, like I just went over, and occasionally Jhin, and less than that, even things like the Zeri and the Caitlyn and the Ezreal, and even Senna. But TK, 6 times TK started getting banned in second phases of ban phase, if it wasn't picked in the first one, because it is a strong champion, and in 12.4 we're seeing that already, and I think more people are going to be picking it, and we're going to see it more towards the top of the support meta for 12.4. But that was my video on 12.3. If you enjoy this sort of content, like, comment, subscribe. If you have an opinion on the meta in 12.3 or 12.2 or whatever, I'll be more than gladly reading them and responding to them and whatever. So thank you for watching this video, and hope you come back for more content.